Okay, so I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Whitney Marin. I'm a customer success manager at Hivebrite, and today I'm joined by Katy Massey, who is Plan International's UK Partnerships Officer, and our own Meghan Bates, Senior Community Strategist at Hivebrite. So thank you both for being with us today. And also to our audience, we do have a Q&A section at the end of today's call. So yeah, definitely feel free to ask your questions throughout and we will get to them. And also feel free to share your community goals and challenges throughout the chat so we can also kind of take a look at that. All right, so getting started, Katy, can you tell us a little bit more about your community and who it serves?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So lovely to be here. My name is Katy Massey, and I am the community manager for the Girls' Rights Collective UK on behalf of global NGO Plan International UK. So Plan International is a global NGO that advocates for children's rights and equality for girls. And so the community I manage, the Girls' Rights Collective UK, is a UK-wide professionals network to convene the girls sector. So our membership is open to professionals, academics, activists, and organisations who work or volunteer with girls in the UK. And really, our purpose is to build capacity in the UK girls sector to foster collaboration and share best practice.
Mm-hmm. And
Love
where
that.
exactly? Oh, go ahead, Meghan.
And hi guys, I'm Meghan Bates. I'm an Austin-based community practitioner. So I work for Hivebrite as the senior community strategist, helping both Hivebrite employees and our clients get smarter about community management. And then I think I cut you off, Whitney, so I'll let you ask your question again.
Oh, I was just going to say we're very lucky to have Meghan. It's really exciting that we can talk about community today and kind of have her on board to speak with Katy as well. So I'm curious to know, Katy, where does community sit within your organization? And then also, Meghan, kind of how have you seen communities sit within organizations of different types of companies?
So on a really practical level, I sit in our UK programs team. So as I said, our community, our network is for UK organisations. So I sit in that team, but I work kind of across our organisation. So I support our policy, our campaigns team, corporate partners, fundraising, media, anyone in our organisation that needs to foster connections and collaboration with any other organisation in the UK can come to me and come to our network to tap into the contacts that we have.
Yeah, and so I think depending on the community and what the context is, communities can sit in a variation of spaces. So I've seen communities exist in underneath marketing. I've seen them exist under client success or just in different places depending on the different needs of an organization.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So can you tell us a little bit more about the key responsibilities of a community manager and how do they impact an organization's success?
Yeah, so definitely have a few responsibilities, I think, as a community manager. So I'll start with the really practical ones. A big part of my role is around onboarding people to onto Hivebrite, to monitor the platform, reply to messages, kind of do any tech support, creating content for there, so generating really interesting conversations for people, sharing things that I think would be really helpful to their practice, and responding to emails and all those kinds of things. It's also my responsibility to foster that collaboration. So I think a community manager's role is really we set the culture, we create that culture for our community, and so we need to lead by example. So that a huge amount of my work as well is around having monthly connection calls with our community, making introductions to people and kind of being of value and serving the community. And then I also host events. So I put on virtual webinars and workshops, whether that's training, capacity building on specific themes. And I host roundtable discussions and in-person networking events as well. And the second part of your question there is around how does that kind of impact the success of our organisation? Really, our community was created because we knew there was a gap in the market. There wasn't anyone in the UK convening the conversation on girls and girls' rights specifically. And we wanted to be able to do that, to share power and to bring everyone into that conversation. So we really impact success by building that capacity. It also gives us as an organisation a really broad overview of what's going on in the sector. So it helps us with our strategic direction, our planning, but we can also then share that knowledge with the sector as well and say, okay, we're noticing these trends and these themes across our sector. You know, where are there gaps in practice and who is best placed to do that work?
So it's really about getting those actors in the same space, in that same kind of like digital room.
Yeah, exactly. And distributing that power as well, because we know when there are big charities, big organizations, they often have kind of lots of power, and they're invited into kind of lots of rooms just by the name, the organizational name that they have, or the amount of employees. And so we really wanted to be able to share that with, you know, really grassroots organizations as well, who are doing the work on the ground, but maybe aren't always the first to be invited in. So we wanted to make sure that we were really, spreading the power.
Awesome. I think one, Katy, there are so many things that you mentioned that are part of an everyday like community manager's work. And so if there's one thing that I would add to that, because everything that you mentioned is totally spot on with what we would expect out of a community manager. I find that the best, healthiest community manager environment is one where all of those different tasks are both in alignment with what stakeholders are actually needing and what community members are actually wanting. So sometimes a community can be too much of the stakeholders' ideas of what need to happen. And then sometimes it's, you know, members are completely running and driving whatever they'd like to happen. But then, you know, stakeholders may have an issue with some of the things that are happening in the space. So of all the things that you mentioned, I think sometimes that's a 12-hour job, like start to finish. You're writing content, you're talking with someone throughout the day, you're going back and checking emails throughout the day. And I think someone mentioned in the chat, just wondering like how that can be full-time, how that can be part-time work. I think community management can be both. It can be part-time work, it can be full-time, but as an end, it has to be a mix between both what stakeholders want or what stakeholders need and what community members are actually wanting.
Yeah,
So
that's really
that's the impact to me, I would think.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a really good point, and it kind of segues to our next question, which is how can community managers really effectively prioritize their daily tasks and responsibilities so that you're getting that kind of engagement and productivity and meeting both those stakeholder needs, but also what the community is asking for.
Yeah, well, just to follow on then for what you just said, Meghan, which is so true, is I think you need to be really clear on your why. Why does your community exist? And so, you know, there might be two different reasons. Your internal stakeholders might have one why, one purpose, and your community members might have another. And so for me, it's really important to get very clear on that. And if there's a difference, for me to understand, okay, where does the priority need to be? What's the balance here of me doing that? And for me, really looking at my non-negotiables. So like on a daily basis, what are the non-negotiables for me? Well, it's definitely checking in with the community. What's been going on? What have people been sharing? Does anyone need support? So going back to those kind of really practical things, making sure that I'm, you know, building a supportive culture. And categorizing my time. So I've got very good at kind of time blocking my diary, using a virtual planner, organizing it by theme, and then kind of sharing that with any internal stakeholders that need to see, you know, have visibility of what it is that I'm doing. And also, I think for me, on a daily basis, I try and put myself in the shoes of our members. So like, what is their user experience? What's their journey from start to finish? Are there any elements of that need like extra support or nurture or care? And like how to keep them engaged. So like I said, you know, being really responsive to messages, being active, like I need to be visible on there so people know who to come to when they've got questions. And then something that I found really interesting since doing this role is like the kind of psychology behind behavior change. So really like understanding, why do people join these kinds of communities? What's their motivation, and what is their hook? Like what do they need to kind of keep coming back? And then focusing my attention, like noticing those patterns and those themes, and then focusing my attention on that as well. So, you know, if some people are struggling with the tech aspect of it, they're not going to keep coming back. And so I need to focus, okay, well, how can I make this environment more supportive or more user friendly from the start, so that it kind of suits everyone, and everyone feels that they can engage.
Love that. From my perspective, I kind of split things into threes. So if I had to, let's say, even if it's just 30 minutes, right? 10 of those minutes, like Katy was mentioning, is devoted to understanding the tech, because I think if users don't understand the tech, or they're having access issues,
Mhm.
I'd like to think are, that's probably the top most important kind of fire drill to practice in the community. How do I help people bridge the gap between entering, getting in the space, and feeling comfortable with the technology we're using? So that's 10 of my minutes. I would say the secondary 10 minutes is devoted to making sure I'm communicating the value of the community to any stakeholders. So I do what I called like a community boost when I was community managing, constantly providing a month over month. Hey, I know you didn't ask, but this is how the community is doing based on what that stakeholder wanted. So that way I'm not getting to, a year out, which I see so often happen. We get maybe a year out and someone says, well, what's the point in this space? Why do we have it? Well, I've already communicated that to you 12 times before we got to this end of year kind of quarterly wrap up. And then I would say the third is just making sure that I'm talking with my most active or most devoted users. So making sure, sometimes I think in the interim or in the initial standpoint of a community, you are making your own content and trying to post and get people to engage. But if I could kind of cut that time in half even and just focus on talking to Katy or talking to Whitney, and asking them like, hey, that was something that I really loved you said, could you post that in the community?
Mhm.
That's more important than me just sitting down and trying to build out a content calendar. And I'd even go so far as to say, sometimes I think that can be an issue for community managers. People expect us to be these content kind of wheels. They want us to just pump out blog posts or create social posts and then put those in the community. And I kind of go in reverse. I really focus on what are my community members really talking about, and how can I get them to post that in the space? And then I can fill in with blog posts or things that were really engaging on social. And then another part to that I'd add is the life cycle. So if anyone is ever interested in what kinds of things they should be doing in a community, sometimes we have to be very careful that we're not doing something that is too mature of an action or too mature of an engagement practice. So identifying where you are in the community life cycle, there are 4 stages, and then really building your activity with users based on that.
Yeah, that really resonates. I'm like taking notes over here, mental notes. So, what kind of tools and strategies can community members or community managers use to effectively manage their time and kind of streamline that communication and collaboration?
So for me, I'll start with this one. I am a big fan of facilitation software, project management software, and then anything else that naturally automates processes in the community. So from a facilitation standpoint, I was a community manager for a facilitation software company, and I just saw how a 60-minute conversation felt a lot more fun with our members when we could put everyone on a whiteboard and say, well, Whitney posted this. I really love what Whitney said, so I'm going to add some stars or a GIF, in reaction to that. Like that creates a much more powerful experience than me just using a slide deck and just asking everyone to come off mute. And then you create that kind of unnecessary volley. So I would think any kind of facilitation software is helpful. From there, project management. So your Asanas, your Trello boards, anything that can create a list or a Kanban or a Gantt tracker, those I would highly recommend. I know that Asana is one that I actively use. And if you've not used Asana, it actually allows you to create a form. And then that form, let's say someone has a request or feedback they'd like to see a new event in the community, right? That form about this event that they're really interested in can be created as a task. Like it kind of automates that process. So I'm really big on project management tools. And then from there, just general automation. So I know ChatGPT is really big in just the content world in general or engagement space. But there's also, there's Zapier, there's Monday, there's any other type of way that I can automate content going directly over into the community. And I think that's the most helpful to me.
What about you, Katy?
Yeah, I think all of those kind of electronic planners are really helpful. I just use like MS Planner, so nothing too fancy, but you know, categorize all of the tasks that I have. I share that with anyone that needs to have oversight of what I'm doing as well, so that they can just at a glance see, okay, what's going on this week or what's going on thematically. And it also really helps me see where I'm spending most of my time, and actually if that's where I want to spend most of my time. Because if I've got a category of, for example, content creation or onboarding or dealing with questions or whatever it is, and I keep seeing that that list is the longest, and actually that's not the most productive use of my time, then I've got evidence to show that something needs to change, which I find really helpful as well. Hivebrite has got lots of ways that we can automate our content too, which is really helpful. So you can create templates for your email and your newsletters. You can send out daily and weekly digests that are just automated as well. And, you know, they just keep your community engaged automatically. You don't need to do anything about them apart from kind of, you know, build them initially and then automate them. And lots of our members say that those weekly digests are really helpful because at a glance they can see, has anyone created a new event this week? What are people talking about? You know, and I don't have to do anything with that, which is great, but it adds value for them. I also just really love the function where you can export email addresses really easily. So if I ever need to, you know, track numbers or anything like that, I find the back office of Hivebrite really easy to understand. I find all the functionalities really helpful. I also have thematic working groups. So under the group section, I've renamed it as communities. So it feels like more collaborative for them, but they're all themed on different areas of girls' rights that our community work or volunteer in. And those thematic groups, then people can self-select to join them. And so again, it doesn't need to be something that I'm doing, but as they join the community, they can then decide, okay, well, I'm in the global community and I can see the global live feed, but I'm also really interested in girls' experiences of mental health or girls' experiences of sport or girls' experiences in public spaces, you know, whatever the area of work is. And they self-select and choose that community. And then in there, they can share specific content, ideas, events, resources based on that theme. And they're doing that themselves. You know, they're kind of creating their own little community in there. And I obviously have oversight of them. I obviously create content in there too. But it gives them that sense of ownership of, I've chosen to be here, and I've got that like autonomy to decide where to pay attention to. And something I'm building at the moment is then having ambassadors for each of those thematic communities. So whether that's an individual or an organisation that's kind of championing that area of work, they will become the ambassador of that thematic working group. And then we'll have kind of ambassador meetings so that they can meet each other and kind of be the ones spearheading the conversation on these things. And the last thing is I've just piloted co-collaborating workshops with our community. So it was recently Black History Month, and so I put a call out to our member community to say, do any organisations want to collaborate and host a workshop with me? So I'll do all of the like tech stuff, but you can come and create the content. And that worked really well because members then saw, actually, you're doing this with us, you're not doing this for us. And that generated some really lovely conversation. And then lots of other organisations have now put their hand up and said, can we do the next one?
Yeah, I love that. Oh, go ahead, Meghan.
Just add to that, I kind of nerded out a little bit, but hearing Katy talk about the thematic approach is just so important, because a lot of the times we think that, you know, in order to build a better or more productive community, you need $100 a month in a certain type of software. But a lot of the different processes that Katy's using actually are in alignment with what we call like an engagement curve. So basically understanding start to finish, if I step in Katy's community, there's a post that's about girls' education. And maybe I add that to my profile, and maybe I can then join a group in girls' education. Maybe there's an event that I can join. So you kind of build out these kind of ways that people can participate in a space. And I actually think it creates the case for community in a lot of ways. Like community automates a lot of the things that naturally are segmented in different software and different processes in a way that they can all just be in one specific hub. And that's kind of the thing that I've always loved about community.
Yeah, and you want people to find people that, you know, they have things in common with, right? I mean, as humans, that's what we do. We seek out people who are similar to us, or people that we feel safe with or a sense of belonging with. And so I just think to be able to come into a community and immediately feel a sense of belonging, especially when, you know, we've got over 200 organizations now in the community. There's over 600 members, about 300 of them are active on the virtual platform. But that's a big, you know, especially if your you know, your learning style is one that doesn't really like kind of mass communication or introducing yourself virtually. So I think, yeah, being able to immediately find a safe space has been something that's been really important for me to try and create, and also ask members then what would help you feel safe, or what would help you engage, and they say the same thing, that they want to see themselves in the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was also going to say, Katy, that it's a great kind of opportunity to co-create the space with them, and you're really building these like conscious partnerships. So people that are joining are really actively contributing to what you want to see. So yeah, kudos to you. That's a really great strategy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's part of our, you know, the ethos of the Girls' Rights Collective as well. Like I said at the beginning, is around distributing power, and we know it's a big conversation at the moment in the charity and humanitarian sector, which Plan, you know, is part of, is around decolonisation and understanding bias and anti-racism. And so this is also part of that conversation, which is, okay, so where can we notice our privilege, and how can we change that?
Awesome.
Kind of segueing to a different kind of topic here that's been kind of a big deal in the community space, I would say, in the past like year and maybe before that. But how can you avoid burnout in the kind of fast-paced world of community management?
Great question. And I've also seen in the chat, people have asked things about being part-time, full-time. So I'll speak to that as well. So my role in this role, my hours are 21 hours a week. So 2.5 days. I work Monday afternoons, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I need to be really organized, and I need to be really specific and focused with my time, and really purposeful with it. So I mentioned before that I block time out in my diary. I'm really boundaried about that. I also have learnt to say no to things. So when meeting invites come in, do I really need to be there? Can I read the minutes? Can I contribute virtually? Is there a shared doc where I can, you know, add comments or whatever? How can I, you know, contribute more efficiently? While also knowing that it's important for me to stay engaged and to keep having conversations with people, and not to just be kind of working in silo, but for me to really get that balance of where it should my time really be. And it's a work in progress. Yeah, I kind of reflect on it with my line manager as well, and have these conversations. But also using my out of office, really bounded about that. As soon as that goes on, I do not check those emails until it's my next working day, because that is, you know, a very fast track to burnout, to resentment, to struggle. So yeah, being really bounded about that too. The other thing for me is really remembering that the members of this community have a day job, have a very important day job, which is running or working in their own charity, their own organisation. And being a member of this community for them is a bonus. So it's great that they get to join our virtual platform, they get to come to our events, but it's in addition to the work that they are being paid to do, or the programmes they're being paid to deliver. And so just because it's my day job and I'm really passionate about it, and it's a thing I'm thinking about all the time when I'm doing this work, doesn't mean it's their priority. And so things might take longer than I would hope, because I might be the one saying, great, well, we've got this event next week, do you want to sign up? And they might not see that for 2 or 3 days, because, you know, their inbox is so full doing their own job. So for me, it's about also adjusting my expectations of that engagement, and knowing that sometimes these things take a bit longer. And then really like remembering the bigger picture. So why does my community exist? It exists to connect the sector. So that, you know, while we can measure targets and like analyze data, metrics and things, a lot of that is also quite immeasurable. Like, how can I really fully comprehend how many times I've connected people, or where these conversations have gone? And so kind of trusting as well that that I'm working on something. This is a long-term project, and we're here, you know, for the long term. It is successful. People do engage with it, but that it won't all happen in one day. And then the last thing I think about, which is a story, it's like a story about starfish, which you may have heard of, but it's told in lots of different ways. But one of them is that there's a young boy on the beach, and the beach is covered in thousands of starfish, and he's picking them up one by one. He's throwing them back into the ocean so that they'll survive, because when they're on land and out of water, they won't survive. And then there's a man that walks along towards him and says, you know, what are you doing? There are thousands of starfish, you'll never be able to save them all. And he says, yeah, but I can save that one, you know, like it matters to this one. And that's how I see this, you know, building communities, not just my own, but that's what we're doing as well, is we're really trying to serve one person at a time, make a difference one day at a time. And so I really try and have that perspective as well. If I feel like I am becoming really stressed about something, or, you know, ever at the point of potentially feeling like burnout or looking like that, of taking a step back and saying, why do we exist, and what are the non-negotiables, and then what is a bonus as well, and trying to put it in that perspective.
I love that mentality.
That starfish analogy, I'm going to post a note and put on my computer. That's wonderful. Yeah, I think someone asked about in the chat, like, when you go out of office, Katy, is there any practice that you have with members in that space? If not, I can share some of mine as well.
In terms of how they can still remain engaged while I'm offline?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there are 2 members of my core team that have access to our back office. So just for like general, you know, they can accept people, accept member requests. They can check if there was anything to moderate. They could also check that. So the tech side of it is kind of completely covered. But our community also knows, they're very clear what my working hours are too. And in my out of office, I have lots of like, if you've got a question about this, then here's what you can do. If you've got a question here, and this is when I'll be back online. And so far, you know, I've been in this role for 2 years, and the community's been live for a year. So far, everyone is like, yeah, okay, she'll be back on this day. And, you know, it's actually not that urgent. And I think because we've set that understanding from the beginning. And like I said before, this is an addition to other people's work, you know, this is a bonus for them too. So far, we haven't really had any kind of urgent situations in that way. But I think what has been really helpful is for me to be really clear. In those 2.5 days, I am here. Any question, anything, my inbox is open. You let me know what you need. And I will get back to you when I'm back online.
Love that. In very structured, and I think that's a very structured way to do that from like an individual perspective. I've also seen in some communities that I've been a part of where there is actually just kind of a period where the community can take a pause. And so there are ways that you can strategize that, of saying, hey guys, between, you know, I've seen mostly around holidays, like, let's all take a break. You know, you wouldn't expect any other, you know, worker. I mean, they're essential people, but community is okay to sometimes take a pause and let everyone kind of breathe and come back in the new year. So that's something that I've seen that I wanted to share as well. Whitney, you were asking the question earlier, and so just to keep on our go here, psychological safety is something that I learned through facilitation that I think is so important to making sure both me and my members are in a good place. It's practice and facilitation, but I think on a widespread level, we can all do a better job of understanding how to run meetings start to finish effectively. I'm very big on honoring our users' time. So making sure that anytime that I need to ask them for something or engage with them, they're very clear on, you know, they know ahead of time by, you know, months in advance, this is the day that I picked, this is the hour, I'm going to cut us at the hour because I want to be respectful of your time. And Katy mentioned earlier that buffer, I also function under a buffer. So anytime there's a meeting coming up, I buffer the meeting before, like a meeting buffer before the meeting and a meeting buffer after the meeting if I can, so that I have time to prep and make sure I'm productive before I get on a call with someone or before I'm engaging. And then if they have questions afterward, I can still talk to them. And some of the best times I've seen users kind of climb up that engagement curve is in those after meeting, after hours kind of buffer, where we get to talk and kind of really connect. Yeah, those are the ideas that I would recommend essentially.
These are really good tips. I think burnout is something that can happen really no matter what field you work in, kind of in any environment. So
Yeah.
kind of having that top of mind is, yeah, really good.
Yeah. There is one, I will actually say, I think a lot of the times as community managers, we get really excited about like the engagement and making sure someone's talking. But sometimes I think the brightest members in a community are not always the ones who talk the most. And those are the people that you can build your community around as well to avoid burnout. Because too often I've built a community where there's someone who's like the chatty person in the space, and the community centers around them. And then everyone knows like, well, I have questions, but I can't talk because this person is front and center, right? So I think burnout is often just as much about building in like processes that work, but also about choosing the right people to build your community around. And once you get to that place of like building it around psychologically safe people that everyone can engage with or that people feel safe around, I think some of that naturally allows you to delegate to the right people, to the right hands, and you can kind of take a break and go on vacation and not worry about your community blowing up. So something I'd recommend.
Okay, we have just a few more questions before we open it up to the Q&A. So kind of wondering, how do you demonstrate the value of your community to leadership? I know, Meghan, you had shared a couple strategies about really showing them throughout the year, so it's not kind of like a big thing. Katy, do you have any tips that you want to start us off with?
Yeah, so there's the really kind of practical metrics we can look at. So membership numbers, how many people are on our mailing list, how many of those then convert to signing up to Hivebrite, how many of those are using the app version or the desktop version, how many are coming to our virtual trainings, our workshops, our in-person events. So all of those metrics we can use to demonstrate like numerical value, I think. But for me, the thing I'm normally more excited about is like verbal feedback, people saying, you know, what's their feedback, what have they gained, what value have we added, what have they learned, what connections have they built from coming to our events or being part of our community. I really love being able to show like, you know, a screen grab where I introduce two people, I tag them both in one of the thematic working groups, and then they go off and they start running a project together. Like that's, you know, incredible as well. I'm currently onboarding a research think tank to do some monitoring evaluation, like impact analysis with us. So they're going to look retrospectively what we've done in the last year, and then do some forward thinking with us. So they'll host some focus groups with our community to ask, you know, what's working really well, why are you a member, what motivated you to join and to stay as well, because I think that's a really important thing to look at. It's not just how many people can we get signing up, but actually are they engaging, and are they engaging? I'd rather have 10 people that are engaging and getting something out of it than 100 who are silent and like not even logging on, you know. So I think that'll be really great to start working with them next month, to really get some data as well. But I think also for our leadership team is knowing now that we have this network, this community that they can tap into at any point. So you know, just the other day, one of our team said that she's looking into an area of work, and I said, well, why don't I ask that of our community and see which other organizations are doing the same thing, and maybe we can set up a roundtable discussion, you know. And so it's just them knowing now that this exists and it's here, and that they can ask questions, search for best practice, you know, see who else is doing this work in the UK, and then really start to collaborate together.
Love that. I'd say from my perspective, I start with, I think not often enough do we really explain the value of our community in less than 30 seconds. So one of the biggest things that I try to create with clients or try to help them establish is, what is the pitch of this community? You know, who does it serve? How does that relate to what stakeholders want? And what's one major win from this community? If you can get that under 30 seconds and just communicate that to users or stakeholders, like you've got it in your pocket, and it's far more helpful than we can imagine. From there, I think obviously, like I mentioned, using a community boost. So really providing an overall sense of what the ROI is of the community on a monthly or a routine basis, and getting that in front of our stakeholders is really important. But if there are community members who need to see that as well, to encourage them to keep going or to continue connecting to this space, that can be important. And then from a third, like even broader perspective, I think Katy may have touched on this earlier, but sometimes providing the ROI of a community isn't just about sharing a spreadsheet of this is what the back end looks like, right? We kind of have to be community managers and data analysts to a certain degree and make some inferences in ways that we would imagine. So just keeping an eye on the data, but also learning or taking some time on the side. I worked for a data analyst company, so some of that I see naturally and can kind of understand some inferences behind. But if you're showing just the back end to a stakeholder, they're probably not understanding. So make sure that you're creating healthy inferences between, if I have 6,000 users who are logging in, this is what this really means, right? Versus just showing them this is 600 or 6,000 users who've logged in. Those are two completely different outcomes.
Yeah. And I'd love to know, do you have any kind of success stories, speaking of kind of different ways to display value, that you'd be able to share from your work in community?
Yeah, definitely. So some of these are a little more altruistic in nature. I know that communities are revenue driven at times, but one of my favorite examples is, I think in about 3, I've worked in many communities. I would say I've consulted for about 20 plus communities thus far, but managing a community, it's always fun to see like a new member join. We build a connection, and over time they're so passionate about what's happening in the community, that person long term becomes an employee to the brand. I've seen it in just about every community I've managed. Someone will come to me in the beginning and they're going, I'm really nervous, I don't want to talk. But then, a year or two later, someone is, doing a podcast on something in the industry, or they're asking me for a reference letter to join the company itself. So if you've got that in your community, definitely write those things down, because those are ways, very clear ways we see like where a company could be paying for hiring services or anything to that nature. Some of that can come naturally through your community and building engagement with your users. In support communities, my dad is a nurse, so I think they mean a lot to me naturally, but I have seen countless times in support communities, someone come in and be able to realize, oh, I think I have this kind of condition, just because of the ways that they've been able to talk with someone or be coached by a caregiver to say, yeah, I think maybe you should get this checked. I'm not a medical professional, but I would be happy to, hear back and develop a relationship with you. So that's really important to me. And then I would say a third most important experience, we had a community where there were over 100,000 users in this space. So members were talking to one another, but more so in their group spaces and not in like one giant space together. And the founder of that community, or the founder of the organization, ended up passing away. And so the team built this major dashboard where we said, we want people to be able to talk to one another, but in order to create, we had over 100 plus groups, you're creating 100 plus groups content, right? So we pulled everyone into this main dashboard where it was almost like an obituary, where they could share different impact stories or share photos and videos. Over time, that space became so flooded in a good way with content that the founder's wife came into the space. She'd never been in it, but wanted to get in that space. She'd heard about it from people in the organization, and she began kind of joining the community and commenting and posting and thanking folks just for sharing different things about her husband. Those are definitely, I would say, 3 memories that kind of stick with me and always make this work really worthwhile.
How about you, Katy?
Yeah, similar. I think it's those like individual stories that are so important. When we host events, whether it's virtual or in person, the feedback afterwards is people saying, I'm so grateful this space exists, like I feel less alone now, or I had no idea that so many other people were working on the same issues, you know, particularly because our community exists in the girls' rights space, and so much of those conversations are difficult ones, you know, looking at where girls aren't able to realise their rights, whether that's around safety or education or health. And so it can be really difficult sometimes to be doing that work and to be feeling like you're fighting that battle alone. So for people to be able to come together and say, oh, there are 3 or 4 other organisations that are also working to try and improve girls' access to mental health services, great. Well, you know, what can we share? What best practice can we share? Has been amazing. And there was one piece of feedback from one of our first events where someone said, it's so incredible and lovely to be able to be in a space that's collaborative and not competitive, because so much of the charity sector, we have to compete with the same amount of funding. You know, funding is difficult and often kind of very short term as well. So it fosters this community of competition, and that can be really detrimental then to working together and to collaborate. And ultimately, we're all working with the same end goal, which is to make the UK a better and safer place for girls to live. So actually being able to create that environment, that feels like such an honour. I always feel like so grateful when I host these events and host these spaces. And people are able to work through their fears as well. It's so lovely that sometimes people will come to one of the events and I'll ask organisations to present their work, and they maybe have a really big fear of public speaking, but because the community feels safe and because they've started to get to know each other, they're able to practice that, and then to see the relation afterwards that they've been able to speak in front of people about their work and that people receive that in a really positive way. It's just such an amazing feeling. In terms of like really practical success stories, you know, I've been able to connect media teams with experts that they can then write like op-eds on things that are then printed in the press. I mentioned before, I've introduced organisations who are now running programmes or campaigns for girls in the UK as well. So seeing really tangible evidence that building a community of like-minded people can only really do great things. And I'm so excited to start working with the research think tank, because there'll be so many of these stories that I've just not heard yet and not been able to capture. But yeah, so far it's been incredible.
That's kind of amazing. I love hearing this from both of you, Katy and Meghan. I'm wondering, just kind of sneaking a little question here, but how are you able to kind of leverage these stories to show your community kind of all of the positive outcomes that have, you know, been happening?
Yeah, I'm very big on routine. So the same way I'd include that in like a community boost, when I'm having conversations with our users at the top of calls, that's just devoted to thank you for your impact. Here's directly how that has been affecting users in our community. So just keeping it routine and making sure that you're communicating it as early as possible.
I host monthly Spark sessions, I call them. So they're like virtual drop-in sessions that any community member can join, and they can share, they can celebrate what's been working well, they can come and ask for collaborations and things. And so just being able to hear those stories in those monthly meetings, they're consistently in the diary. Members know that there's, you know, no obligation to come, but they're often turning up and saying, oh, thank you for introducing me to that person last month, because this is what's happened, you know, going forward. And just being able to create that that ongoing conversation with members has been really valuable.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, we have one last question before we open it up to the Q&A. But if you had a magic wand, what community problem would you solve?
Katy, what do you think?
So this is actually a question that I ask our members when they're signing up and creating their profile. So it's one of the like set questions that I've put in there so that it's on their profile and people can kind of get a sense of who they are, what they care about when they look at their profile. For me, really around the girl sector, it's around funding. The funding model of the UK charity sector is broken and is unsustainable and needs some support really. And the majority of challenges that our members are facing are often funding related, whether that's around, you know, practically, do we have enough money to keep our organisation going? Do we have enough money to keep people's contracts going? But the trickle down effect of that, firstly on programmes. So if an organisation has a year of funding to deliver a programme with girls, it takes girls sometimes 6 months to trust an organisation in their community to go and to, participate, and then they only have 6 months to deliver, and then they have to rebid for that funding, And also in terms of psychological safety, which you mentioned before, Meghan, it's really difficult for an organisation to maintain psychological safety if there's no job security. And then how can we expect then our employees to deliver programmes to girls who are often in challenging or vulnerable situations themselves? The whole thing is so interlinked. And so if I had a magic wand, that is what I would do. It wouldn't be that we would need all the money in the world, but just that it was sustainable and it was consistent and it was reliable, so that people really knew, okay, we've got enough time to really have an impact here in a really safe and kind of consistent way.
If I had a magic wand, it would be to kind of speed up the process for understanding community as a discipline. I am constantly thinking, man, a lot of the conversations we're having are good conversations, but it's still such a young industry, right? When I think about, the greats or the people who are on my bookshelf, the writers who are in this space, there's a lot of very new information about online community. There's a ton of information about community in general as a practice, but in the online space, we're still trying to figure out, how do we safely moderate very difficult topics? How do we make sure that we measure the ROI of community? Some of that is naturally, I think, because the discipline is just very new. I had a conversation with someone recently who was asking about, well, why can't some of the things that we do just be an email? And like, well, this is still a very new discipline. Email has been out for decades now, and decades ahead of community. So I really wish that there was just space for community to grow. I think there's a lot that, especially as AI comes along, there's so much that can just be automated, and people are really struggling with trust online. And, we can talk about the revenue of community, but, there are real people behind a community. And if we don't invest in the real people and their very real needs, there is no community. There is no need for talking about revenue of the community. So, yeah, I really wish we had more time or the ability to just speed up what we know about community so that people can start having more effective, more safe opportunities to communicate online.
That's a really good point. Okay, so it looks like we're going to open it up to the Q&A. I see we have a handful of questions here. I'll just go ahead. Tim East is asking Katy, has the platform helped foster connections between the organizations and users on the platform? We currently do this manually through email and want the solution to reduce our involvement with it.
Yeah, it absolutely has. When I first started this role, as I was kind of scoping a virtual platform to use, I was doing everything on email, and it was really hard to keep track of. And it also held me in the position of authority, which actually is not what a community is about. Like, yeah, it should have someone that's kind of nurturing it, but we really wanted it to be collaborative. So we now will have members might post an event, or they might post a request or a resource, and you are able to tag people in it, and so they can immediately see, and it can send them an email notification to say, you've been tagged in something, do you want to review it? And now what I'm seeing, because I've been doing that consistently, is now other members are tagging each other in it too. So I've kind of tried to model that behavior and say, this is how we do things around here. We collaborate, we share things, we share resources. So it's been invaluable to be able to use it in terms of not just my time, but also it's really simple for me to just do that. But that's also then visible to other people. Whereas on email, that's just between those people that are in that email thread. And we also know that everyone's inboxes sometimes are overflowing and we might miss things. Whereas it's really visible on there, and it doesn't just rely on me, because just say it's my non-working day, but someone else sees that, they can go ahead and they can tag because they've seen it's not happened yet. So yeah, I think it's been a game changer really for us, for our community.
Okay, so our next question was actually asked by two different people to Meghan, and they want to know, Elke Lehman and Katrina Clem, what are the 4 life cycle stages of a community that you mentioned?
That's awesome. If I just want to answer or add one thing to Katy's thought, that one of the easiest ways that we can provide like the community's value is by saying, like, because Someone else could answer this question in the community. Like that takes, it's time to value, but it essentially allows us to say like, this was answered quite quicker than it would have been if it would have been done through an email channel, those kinds of things. Very easy ROI kind of KPI there. Okay, so question that was asked to me, could you just repeat that one more time just so I make sure I get it?
Sure. So what are the 4 stages of the community life cycle?
Community life cycle. So we just had a training on this. Shout out to Susie Nelson, my twin who's here today. So inception, growth, maturity, and then mitosis. So those are the 4, and there can be more than that. But the idea is that communities start in inception, and then eventually they, the healthiest communities have the ability to split. And then they kind of start that process over. You can jump between, you can go from inception to maturity, come back to inception, go to mitosis. But I will say to that, to all the community managers here, if there's one thing that I want you to understand, with life cycle, it's really important to understand like migrating a community doesn't inherently mean, so migrating a mitosis level 4 community does not always mean that that community is going to stay in mitosis. So a lot of the times I get clients who will say, well, we're going to migrate from WhatsApp and there are 6,000 users over there. We're going to bring 6,000 users over to our space. I don't want to scare you by any means, but we need to really work on making sure those 6,000 users can get into this space to continue being at a very high level in the life cycle. So really think about, if we're migrating, there is a possibility for a drop in users in user engagement initially, but I think there are some really clear practices that you can use to make sure that you don't lose those users. Case in point, in a community that I'm working with now, one of the biggest things that we're trying to do is say, what are the kinds of conversations they're having on WhatsApp? What's the behaviors they're modeling on WhatsApp? How can we mirror that in the new space? So building out the content calendar, sometimes it's not about building a net new content calendar in this new space. It's about taking some of the old content and making sure people can say, hey, that was huge over there. Let's talk about it in this space. Hey, that was a really nice feature that we had. It still exists on this brand new platform. So always thinking about things in terms of the life cycle, because they help you understand, like, based on identifying where my community is, these are the types of engagement we should be sharing.
I just want to add to that the really interesting point about what behavior is being modeled on what they're already using and what can we replicate here. I had that with LinkedIn really, because a lot of our community is on LinkedIn, shares things on LinkedIn, and then for me to say, hey, you also can download this new app and you've got to get to know that and kind of add that into your daily routine. If I'm going to check Instagram, I'm going to check Twitter, my emails, whatever it is. And so the thing I found really helpful to replicate that is using the direct messages on Hivebrite, because then instead of me, again, like kind of reverting back to email, I can send them a direct message. And I think people initially were a bit surprised, like, oh, I hadn't expected to get that through. But now they're talking to me consistently on direct message, which, we would do on LinkedIn normally. But it's just to, I think that point has been really valuable for me too. What is their behavior over here and how can I try and, replicate it over here?
Awesome.
Another question for Katy from Martina Cortini. How do you leverage super users to help your community grow?
Oh, actually, Meghan, I think you probably be able to answer that one.
Yeah, so super users, I'll say, are just, if anyone is unfamiliar, they're just very active users that you see who could long-term either contribute to critical mass in a community, or in layman's terms, explaining it to a 5-year-old, they're just really active people who could take care of your community in your place. Super users are sometimes referred to as champions or ambassadors, and ambassadors have specific roles in a space, but all of it's kind of under an umbrella of like a super user. I have taught trainings on this, but essentially I think as soon as you start building a community, start building practices that prep it for critical mass. And critical mass is once a community reaches over 50% of its engagement, that 50% of that engagement is done by members, not by you. So initially, maybe I'm working 80%, someone is giving 20% as a user, but ideally you want to flip that. So I'm doing 20% of the work, and then my users are contributing the 80%. So that's it. And then someone is asking right now, Darren's asking, how do you keep super users from being gatekeepers? We have a few know-it-alls and their tone is off-putting to newbies, but obviously we don't want to scare away super users either. Love, love, love that. So I think that goes back down to, make sure. This is that thing I was talking about with community being such a young budding experience, because it's not just marketing. It's kind of sociology at the same time. It's psychology. It's psychology at the same time. So what I recommend, a lot of the times there's just if you can figure out a use for those know-it-alls that is not so people-centric, you know, there is a lot of ego management. You're absolutely right. So when I start seeing that, if someone gets they're dominating conversation, they're being rude to users, I kind of, you know, give options, or I restructure some things so that that person may be spending less time on talking directly with a new member, and give that space to someone who is more actively, or someone I think is ideal for that space. And then from there, it really doesn't hurt to make sure your values are strong, and that you're able to communicate to people that some of these behaviors are the behaviors that we want our community to model. So always focusing on, this is the kind of interaction we want to model with users, less on, I need to manage egos. Because, you know, a lot of this is less about, you know, pointing fingers or blaming, but more about saying, like, how can we find a mutual solution that works for all of us? And those folks with the big egos, they still want to participate, but there may be a different space for them.
Yeah, and I would add to that, that in a former role, I was teaching, and so I had a lot of that in the classroom as well, kind of classroom management, and I really see similarities in these two things. You're essentially monitoring a virtual classroom, a virtual space, and I try and simplify it and think, okay, so we're all humans that have needs, and so when people are contributing in that way, so whether they're coming across as like a know-it-all, or that what need of theirs isn't being met, that they're trying to get met by showing up in our community in that way, and how could I meet that need, or collaborate together, or address that with them? So whether it is that conversation, someone here, Susie said, a kind course correct conversation can work. We have a really clear kind of code of conduct when you sign up as well, so just coming back to that as well, having those conversations. And I'd agree with Meghan, looking at different roles and kind of where might their skills be best suited. And the model I'm going to look at with our ambassadors or champions is that it will be a kind of rotating system, rotating chair as well, so that they'll have that position for, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, and then it will rotate, and that will just be the inbuilt model with kind of no questions. And so they can have that time, but then also it will be passed on to someone else as well. But yeah, I always try and come back to looking at it from, you know, what's their need that isn't being met, and is there a way that I can address that with them in a really kind way, but that just says, okay, I see this, and I care about your contribution, and we want to create space for everybody.
So do we have time for one more question, or are we done? Let me check. Okay, just one more question quickly. How are you all using ChatGPT for Meghan and Katy before closing out?
Katy, I can let you go, or
yeah, you go.
Yeah, so I'll say to this, I lean toward maybe not so much using ChatGPT at this point, but I know times are, you know, we have to keep with the times and make sure that we're keeping in touch with these kinds of things. So I think it can definitely be used as like a generator for content, make no mistake. Just make sure that, you know, as much as you can, you're practicing very ethical practices in using ChatGPT. It's one thing that I will recommend as well.
Yes, I mean, I don't use it for this role at the moment. Maybe that will change in the future, but yeah, at the moment, don't need to.
Okay, well, thank you both so much for taking the time for today's webinar. Looks like we are out of time, but to our audience, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar by email. So if you have any questions, you can just reply to that email. And we have also just shared a survey link. So if you can go ahead and complete that, we would really appreciate it. So thank you both, everyone. And yeah, have a great rest of your 2023.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.